You've been counting on your fingers wrong. Count to the highest number you can on your fingers. You probably made it to 10, right? Well, by the end of this video, you'll be able to count to 12,554 just on your fingers. But why am I even trying to count to over 12,000 on my fingers in the first place? Well, the answer is odd, but basically I was in bed the other night and I thought, hey, you can count higher on your fingers simply by deciding that instead of opening your fingers fully, you'll just open them halfway first. And already we can count to 20, which is 2 times higher than what we started with originally. But with some clever tricks, we can count over 1,000 times higher. But for now, let's go back down to 20. Now that we have this idea of opening our fingers in multiple steps, it's easy to add more positions. For example, we can count to 30 just by opening our fingers 3 times instead of 2, like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. Now, we have a reasonable way of counting 3 times higher than what we started with. Unfortunately, adding more positions becomes almost impossible. And even if you do, it requires moving your fingers in a weird way. There is a way to solve this problem, but first, let's look at a strategy which makes this whole challenge even possible. Because 30 is good, but it's still 12,514 numbers away from our goal. Let's try something. Instead of counting like we were earlier, just count normally, fully opening your fingers. But whenever you reach 5, open one finger on the other hand and reset this hand back to 0. Counting like this, we can count to 25 because we're keeping track of how many times we've reached 5 on this hand and how long until the next 5 on this hand. That's 5 times 5, or 25 numbers. But now let's use our technique from earlier, counting to 15 on one hand and then keeping track of how many times we've counted to 15 on this hand. Just like that, we can count to 255 numbers on 2 hands just by opening each finger 3 times and then using this hand to keep track of how many times we've reached 15. This is what's going to make thousands of numbers possible. Okay, I hear you. You're probably saying, this isn't counting, you're just using multiplication to count to big numbers. But listen to this. That's literally how our normal counting system works. Think of a number, say 23. We don't have an individual symbol for 23. We've got a symbol for 2 and a symbol for 5, but not for 23. So, how do we do that? Well, the 2 in 23 is telling us how many 10s there are. And the 3 is telling us how many 1s there are. Which is the exact same as what we're doing on our fingers. We're going 2 times 10, 20, plus 3 times 1, 3, 23. So if it's good enough for our normal counting system, it's good enough for me counting on my fingers. Okay, moving on. Now, 255 is very good, but it is a long way off from 12,554. And what do we do about that? Well, that brings us back to our problem from earlier. How do we find more positions without having the flexibility of a rubber band? Well, it's actually pretty simple. You need to sacrifice one finger. So, let's sacrifice our thumb. We're going to use our thumb as a pointer, and that way we can use it to point to positions on our fingers. This means we can instantly get way more numbers. For example, you could use each of the segments on your fingers to get 3 segments per finger, or 3 positions per finger. Then with 4 fingers, 3 times 4, that's 12. Not as good as the 15 we had earlier, but still pretty good. Now if we use the segments as well as the creases, then we get 6 per finger. And 6 times 4 is 24, which is better than 15. So, just like this, we can get massive numbers. But obviously now that we're doing lots of different positions, we need some ground rules. So here are my rules. Rule number 1. You need to be able to tell all positions apart pretty easily, just at a glance. You shouldn't be moving your thumb down your finger a millimeter at a time, because if you need a ruler to count along your fingers, you may as well just count along the ruler. Pretty self-explanatory. That would make this whole thing pointless. It is already fairly pointless, but it would make it even more pointless. Rule number 2. The positions need to be relatively easy to reach with your fingers. You shouldn't need to dislocate your finger just to count a bit higher. You need to be able to reach them fairly easily. Pretty simple? Okay. Everything else is free game. So here is how you count to 12,554. I've written down all the positions because there's a lot of them. So this is what the positions are. And you're going to do these for every finger on your finger. Yeah. The tip of the finger. Middle of the first segment. First crease. Middle segment. Second crease. Third segment. Third crease. Area just below the finger. Now you're going to use the finger to point to parts of the thumb. So tip of the thumb pointed to with the finger. First segment. First thumb crease. Second thumb segment. This one's a little difficult to reach with your pinky, but it's easier with all the others. Thumb nail. Back of thumb first segment. Back of thumb first crease. Back of thumb second segment. Back of finger third segment. Back of finger second crease. Back of finger second segment. Back of finger first crease. Back of finger first segment. Fingernail. Finger side first segment. Finger side second segment. Finger side third segment. Finger other side first segment. Finger other side second segment. And finally, finger other side third segment. That's a lot. That was 28 positions on one finger. Multiplied by 4 fingers is 112 numbers. And then you keep track of how many times you've reached that with the other finger. So that's 112 times 112, which is 12,554 numbers counted on your fingers. What will you do with this information? I have no idea. Thanks for watching.